Unlearning Economics made a video on the death of Econ 101, which he talks about minimum wage, rent control, and a bunch of other things. Now, Destiny responded to this video, but there were things that I found really poor on his part when it came to the minimum wage, and also, rather misleading. Now, this video is just going to be about minimum wage, basically, when Destiny was talking about it, because on rent control, I basically agree with him. If you enjoyed the video, then go on twitch.tv/Picklelyme to catch my streams, and thank you.
One thing that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about like wage impacts is, and I notice they do this a lot when they go back and forth on the Seattle studies for how those wages have impacted new workers. I think it's really important that we disaggregate workers from each other to make sure that you're not positively impacting some section of the economy while dramatically negatively impacting some other section. So for instance, I think that it's pretty well understood that as long as minimum wages aren't set too high, generally they have favorable impacts. However, even in those cases, even if on the aggregate wages paid to certain workers are higher, and even if on the aggregate employment seems to be either equal or boosted, the problem that you run into is that you start to disproportionately impact more narrower sets of workers. So for instance, workers with only high school education tend to lose out on these deals, and then more educated workers or people that are doing better socioeconomically already are getting like bigger gains with the minimum wage boost. Tends to be the arguments that I hear.
This isn't necessarily true, and it's interesting he brings up the Seattle studies. The Seattle studies are rather contradicting, but the newest ones that we've seen have been rather positive. I might have it on my sources list. When it comes to disaggregating data, I think when it came to the Seattle studies, the more recent one had positive effects because they looked at take-home pay. It also seemed like the losses that they saw from jobs wasn't because of the minimum wage, and it was because of the heated market overall. They show right here, we concluded the second wage increase 13, reduced hours worked in low-wage jobs by 6-7%, while hour incomes increased by 3%. Consequently, total payroll for such jobs decreased, implying that the ordinance lowered the amount paid for workers in low-wage jobs by an average of $74 per month per job in 2016. Evidence attributes more modest effects to the first wage increase. We estimate an effect of 0 when analyzing employment in the restaurant industry at all wage levels, comparable in many prior studies. So they even actually estimated an effect of 0 in the restaurant industry, which has a lot of high school graduates. I think this is the more positive one, though. They actually corrected a lot of mistakes they made, and they had contradicting evidence. Using administrative employment data from the state of Washington, we used short-duration longitudinal panels to study the impact of Seattle's minimum wage ordinance on individuals employed in low-wage jobs immediately before a wage increase. We draw counterfactual observations using nearest neighborhood matching and derive effect estimates by comparing the treated cohort to a placebo cohort shown from earlier data. We attribute significant hourly wage increases and hour reductions to the policy. On net, the minimum wage increased from $9.47 to as much as $13 per hour, raised earnings by an average of $8 to $12 per week. The entirety of these gains accrued to workers with above median experience at baseline. Less experienced workers saw no significant change to weekly pay. Approximately 1/4 of the earnings gains can be attributed to experienced workers making up for lost out in Seattle work outside the city limits. We associate the minimum wage ordinance with an 8% reduction in job turnover rates, as well as the significant reduction in the rate of new entries into the workforce. It talks about how there are certain things when it comes to jobs that you might lose, but it has a net benefit overall because the earnings are going up. Workers are able to work less hours, but it's still being made up by more educated workers. The story for employees is much more varied. The minimum wage for some large employers jumped from 11 to 13 from 2015 to 2016. The economists observed the impact of the hike in 2017 and found it had dramatic effects on the low-wage workforce and unemployment. Not all of them are good. They found the policy reduced hours worked in low-wage jobs by 67%, while hourly wages in such jobs increased by 3%. Consequently, total payroll for such jobs decreased. That means the total amount that employers paid to workers was less with the new minimum wage in place than protected payroll if the policy hadn't gone into effect. The data researcher Mark C. Long explained suggested a tipping point between 11 and 13, when it became less tenable to keep work in the city. I can't talk today. Critics were quick to point out that this likely wasn't solely due to the minimum wage policy. Seattle's labor market continued to heat up during that period, reducing the number of low-wage jobs compared to high-wage jobs overall. But a year later, the same team published another paper that complicated their findings. They looked at the same time period and same wage increase, but this time broke down the actual take-home pay of workers. Like I said, They found that the workers who were already employed at the low end of the wage scale in Seattle enjoyed significantly more rapidly hourly wage growth, following wage increases in 2015 and 2016. Those who were already working more hours for the wage increase saw essentially all the earning increases, while the workers who had fewer hours saw their hours go down. But wages go up enough so their overall earnings didn't really change. They theorized that a slowdown in new hiring for low-wage jobs could explain their earlier findings that overall payroll hadn't gone down. Ultimately, workers employed either saw their take-home pay go up or stay roughly the same while working fewer hours.
Interesting that it's distracted us from other questions, such as the effect of the minimum wage on mental health or poverty. So now we know that the minimum wage just doesn't have the kind of reliable negative effect on employment we'd expect if the theory were useful. But now I want to talk about another similar...
Okay, so again, I just want to qualify. Now we know that minimum wage set close to what price floors we'd already imagine are, or the price floor that's set close to what the natural minimum wage would be, it has little effect. That we haven't proven that a 15 an hour minimum wage wouldn't have that effect.
We also haven't defined what little and substantial effect means. For example, also it's relative, you know? Like for example, if we increase the minimum wage by, I don't know, like 50 cents and like let's say 7.25 to 7.75, and there was a 10% reduction in, okay, let's say it was a 10% reduction in new job entries in a certain industry, you might be like, okay, that's substantial, that's a substantial effect. But if you were to be like, go all the way to 15 and there's a 10%, you'd be like, okay, yeah, that's definitely worth it.
Right? The closest he got was when he talked about when median wages are set at 59, or when a minimum wage is set to 59% of the median wage, which nationally would work out to around 12 an hour, I believe, or like 11.59.
He found that's the best. It said that was the best evidence that like wasn't like very conclusive. County-based levels have found it was like 81%, right?
It's no secret that both house prices and rents in many countries have skyrocketed over the past couple of decades, especially in Anglo countries. Housing is probably the main cost for most people, so this has prompted questions about whether governments should do more to help people cope with these costs. The most direct policy to do this would be rent control. Rent control isn't a hugely popular policy, although it exists in a few countries and localities. For example, New York City, as discussed by the Friends in the popular sitcom, Friends.
But more important, because of rent control, it was a friggin' steal.
In their debate on housing, philosopher Ben Burgess and streamer Destiny also discussed the policy.
Rent control is like...
That's correct. Opposition to rent control is possibly the area where economists agree the most. A 1990 poll had 93.5% agree that a ceiling on rents reduces the quantity and quality of housing available. A 2012 poll asked for economists' views on the statement, local ordinances that limit rent increases for some rental housing units, such as in New York City and San Francisco, have had a positive effect over the past 3 decades on the amount and quality of broadly affordable rental housing.
I'm really curious why he shows the IGM polls on this. These are the IGM polls, aren't they? They are. Why does he show the IGM polls on this, but he doesn't show the IGM polls on the 15 an hour thing? That really makes me wonder. Because on here, 50% or more of economists agree that 15 an hour would increase unemployment, and that it should be pegged at something different. I wonder why he didn't show the IGM poll.
He highlighted
unemployment.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't 50% or more in question A, right?
And that it should be pegged at something different. I wonder why he didn't show the IGM polls on the
maybe
minimum
by
wage
the
thing that he did for
confidence
rent
interval,
control.
but that's a confidence interval.
Have
Wait,
used
he
them.
didn't scroll down. I've seen that. Oh my god. Okay, if you don't know what the IGM thing is, it's a panel of economists. I don't know. Has Destiny actually? If you want to see what the IGM thing on minimum wage is, it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than what Destiny actually just portrayed there. First of all, let's talk about why Unlearning Economics didn't show the IGM poll for minimum wage versus rent. The reason why he was it we said like 94% of economists thought rent control was a bad policy, and I think he later shows
81%
actually
of
in the
economists
video.
Unless all
Yeah,
the
he
textbooks
shows
are
what
wrong,
some of the
this is wrong.
economists said, like
The
saying
planets are
how
lined
bad
up.
it is.
Theory and
Like strongly disagree that it wouldn't be well. It wouldn't do well. Strongly disagree, and as in they think it's bad. Like he's showing how overwhelming it is that economists hate rent control. But with the minimum wage thing, that's just not true. That's probably why he didn't show it. It's kind of inconclusive. When it comes to this, Destiny didn't scroll down to see the individual comments by the economists. So if you see right here, because I've seen this before, and I've seen this linked before, so I did some research on it, and I kind of just looked at it. But is it actually 50? It's 45%. It's 50% if you rank it by experts' confidence, but I think this is response is probably the better way to go around about that. But 45% agree that. So let's say a federal minimum wage of $15 per hour would lower employment for low-wage workers in many states. This is a bad question. A federal minimum wage of $15 per hour would lower employment for low-wage workers in many states. What is what do you consider a low-wage worker? Lower employment, if it lowers employment by 1%, it's still lowered employment, right? If it lowers employment by 0.000000001%, it's still lowers employment, right? This would be a yes, right? In many states. If two people lose a job in 10 states, it technically counts, right? So like, and you might be like, okay, this is kind of reaching, but this is actually how the economists answered it. If we see, so this is kind of rather inconclusive. It's like 14% disagree, 45% agree, 33% uncertain. It's a big chunk that's uncertain. A lot of the people that were uncertain would have said disagree if it said substantially, because they said the literature did not back they would substantially lower it. And I'm willing to bet there are some that said agree that would say uncertain or disagree if it said substantially. So let's actually look at what the economists said. Evidence that small increases in minimum wage starting from U.S. lows don't have large disemployment impacts. Don't know what 15 will do. That's uncertain. Agree? Doesn't say anything. Agree? Doesn't say anything. Disagree? The weight of the evidence does not support job loss, large job loss, but I'm above extra nervous about setting minimum at 15 an hour during the pandemic. Agree? Doesn't say anything. No opinion. The question seems incomplete. Suppose wages double and employment goes down by 1%. Is that a yes or no? Also, over what time horizon? See, again, he has a problem with the question. 33% said no opinion, or uncertain. I guess actually, if you count, actually, it says 0%. I don't know why it says 0% then. Uncertain, did not answer. Uncertain. The question says lower employment rather than substantially lower. No extent study allows us to rule out some employment effects. Agree. Many is a tough word. Perhaps many states, but for many fewer people. So he's saying in many states, but not a lot of people would actually lose their jobs. That's someone that said agree. Disagree, uncertain, did not answer, uncertain, agree, uncertain. Research has shown modest minimum wage increases do not increase employment. From going from 6 to 15 in the current situation is not modest, so they're unsure. Uncertain, especially about many states, because it's an out-of-sample increase relative to existing studies in sector under distress of COVID fallout. Again, question is not clear enough. Agree. Uncertain, not well worded. I would say disagree if it would not reduce employment substantially, like I said. Agree. I think so, but I think so, but a variable effect could mitigate the negative effect. So saying that there might actually be no negative effect. And he's the one saying agree. Uncertain. Not sure state comparisons make sense. In California Bay Area, impact might be minimal, maybe not so in rural areas. Uncertain. An increase of $15 an hour is a big jump, and I'm not sure we have the data to know what an effect on employment would be. Uncertain. Disagree. Agree. Evidence on employment effects of minimum wages is inconclusive, and the employment losses may well be small, which then would be, I think anyone would say that's a bargain when it comes to like an actual policy. Such a big change will surely have some effect. Not clear it'd be large though. Demand for labor is presumably downward sloping, but the question does not ask anything about magnitudes. Again, saying that it doesn't ask about how substantial it is. If there's a 1% decrease in the in employment, but you double the minimum wage, I think we all agree that's probably an amazing net benefit. Like, it's not even close. This is from off stream, and I actually forgot to include this on stream, so here we go. I'll just include this in the video. The survey that Destiny used was from 2021, and it didn't ask substantially. It just said lower the employment rate at all. That could be like minuscule effects. So that's why so many said uncertain or agree. But if we look at this one from 2015, where the support was actually even lower than it is now, where it asked if it would be substantially lower than under the status quo, well, look at the difference in the responses now. 24% instead of 14% they disagree. 38% say uncertain, 21% say agree. As you can see right there, it's just a lot more, it's even more inconclusive than it was in the last time. It's basically even. And if we want to weight it by if we want to weight it by confidence, we go from Destiny's, 50 or more percent think it would substantially lower it to like 34%. And that's probably lower today than it was in 2015, as more studies have come out showing positive effects of a $15 minimum wage. But the poorly worded question used in 2021 that didn't say substantially lower was starkly criticized by many of the economists, which is why they said uncertain or agree. But they probably would have, if they said agree, they might have gone uncertain or disagree. And if they said uncertain, they probably would have gone disagree, if it actually said substantially lower like it did in the 2015 one. But for some reason, Destiny doesn't seem to bring up the actual comments of the economists.